how you go about submitting a trademark application from start to finish as an individual on an actual use application using the TEAS standard and on a Wordmark. So again, as always, the way to get to the application page, well, let me share my screen, but is to, you can either do a quick Google search. Let me just show you. If you go to USPTO.gov and then go to click on trademarks and then apply online, you'll see it's down here. It's one of the very, very first options, initial application forms. So just go ahead and click on that. And then you can click start your application in TEAS. Now, one thing I'll say is that I'm actually already logged into the system, which is why it takes me directly to this page. But if I wasn't logged in, I logged in before the show started. If I wasn't logged in, I would actually have to create an account and then log in. So they're really easy to create. I suggest that you select two-factor authentication. So when you log in, it emails you a 6-digit code, and you put that 6-digit code and you're in. Secure way to use the system. So just my general recommendations, enable two-factor. They might even require it now. They require us practitioners to have it. So when you get to this page, this is where you get to select the type of application if you want to do the plus application or the standard. I generally recommend that you do the standard almost always. The TEAS Plus is $50 cheaper. As you can see, it's $225 per class instead of $275 per class. But that being said, the TEAS standard gives you full latitude in describing your goods or services. So that's why I generally recommend just do the standard, pay the $50 more. It's worth it in the long run. So we're going to do this from the perspective of an individual. So I'm going to say that no attorney's filing it for me on my behalf. I'm filing it on my behalf. So we're going to click continue. And we're going to, so for the owner of the mark, I'm going to put in my name. And then you do have to indicate if you're an individual or a corporation or so the type of owner. So obviously I'm an individual. And if you select individual, you have to indicate citizenship. So you put your citizenship there. Now, one thing I want to stress is that you do have the option of putting in a DBA, but you should really actually be a DBA if you're going to select DBA. So there's certain requirements to be a DBA. Make sure that you satisfy those requirements. For example, registering with the county. Now, for mailing address, remember, this is going to be public record. So I have a co-working space that I use, so I'll use that. Once we enter in all our information, we're almost done. Now, the one important aspect here is you have to make sure that you actually put an email address. Before, it was the case that you didn't have to, but they started requiring that you actually enter in your email address. So just keep that in mind. And then for phone number, I generally don't recommend putting in phone numbers because it's going to be public record. Just keep it off the record if you can. If the examiner needs to contact you, they'll be emailing you anyways. And email address or website address, I usually just keep it blank. So let's move on. Now, it's going to give you a warning saying, hey, you didn't enter your phone number. But remember, the email address is there. The examiner will have an avenue of contacting us. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it out of the public eye. So when I click continue, this is the part where I actually enter in the mark, the word mark itself. So just to be clear, let me show you guys the word. So this is an example of the goods. So in this case, we're doing face masks. And as you can see, it has a logo, a adibiip group, protecting innovators on the side. So we're just going to type that into this box here and click continue. Now you could click on preview USPTO generated image, and it would actually pop up a dialog showing the actual image version of the word that I just typed in. But if I open it in this case, you won't actually be able to see it because the way it's being shared. But we're going to click continue. We're going to have another opportunity to see it later on in this video. So now this is the cool part. So with the standard, you can actually enter in your own description of goods. You're not limited to the canned descriptions governed by the TEAS application in this plus application. So here, all you do is click enter freeform text, and now you actually get to input the words in your own words the way you want to describe it. So all you do is click enter freeform text, then click add goods and services. But here we're just going to click class. We're going to want to select class 25. So we're going to check this box. We have some weird stuff here going on. Normally there aren't two boxes. So here we can type in the actual description. So clothing and apparel, namely face masks. Now, period. Now, one thing that we're doing here in these videos is we're doing section 1A applications. So we're assuming that we're already selling the goods in commerce. So one thing I want to stress in this video is you have to make sure that you're actually using the mark in commerce. So that means generally what that means on the most practical level is that you have out-of-state sales. So what I recommend doing is make sure that you save a receipt or just have a receipt handy showing that early date. So you're going to have to provide 2 dates. One is the first time you used the mark anywhere, and the second date is the first date that you use the mark in commerce. So for that first use in commerce date, I would recommend that you store and retain records of that first out-of-state sale. If you ever enter into a dispute, it's really, really handy to have that proof. So here we're going to attach our specimen, and for our specimen, we're just going to attach the image that I just showed you. So I have a JPEG of that image, and that's what I'm going to submit to the office. So let me pull it up. Okay. Attach. Now remember, you have to click attach. If you just click return to form, it's not going to save it. So once we attach it, we see it's been uploaded. We see it's right here. And remember, JPEGs or PDFs are acceptable. You cannot upload PNGs. Now when you click, we're going to click return to form, and that's going to take us back to the application. And then we're going to have to add a description of the specimen. Photograph showing the mark. Showing the goods with a label fixed to the goods bearing the mark. Okay, now date of first use anywhere. I'm going to pick January 6 and 4/15. Now remember, the date of first use anywhere, what most people use is just the day that they first, for example, bought the domain name, or just when they first started using that name out there in public. Now, once I click assign filing basis, it's going to assign the filing basis for this class. So for class 25, it's going to assign these 2 dates and this particular specimen. So we're going to click assign filing basis. And now we are good to go. So we have our clothing and apparel, namely face mask, with section 1A under class 25. And when we click continue, we're going to, second class. Why does it have a second class? I'm not sure. This should not be there. Oh, here's what I have to do. You have to remove the check class. So if you select the checkbox and then click remove check classes, it's going to say, are you sure you want to remove it? I'm going to say yes. Okay, here we go. All right. So now when I click continue, it's going to take me to this next page. And I like to use docket numbers just because it helps us keep track of everything. And then I like to add Victoria's email address in this section. Now, one thing I recommend, if you have a coworker, a colleague, a team member, anyone that's on your team, an assistant, it's a really, really good idea to put their email addresses here so that they also will receive the correspondences from the trademark office. It's a really good idea because you don't want to miss an email. We get so many emails these days. It's really nice to have someone else that's also on this application and getting the correspondence. That way, if something comes in, it won't slip through the cracks. So in this case, Victoria will be able to also say, hey, you saw that office action that came in for this trademark application. It's a really smart idea. You can enter in up to 4 email addresses. You just have to separate them by commas or semicolons. So once we click continue, we're actually almost done with the application. At this stage, we're going to have to what's called validate the application. So we can sign directly. Remember, this is a TEAS standard, so it's $275, so it's $50 more than the TEAS Plus. Now, this first checkbox is just saying that we understand that this is a Section 1A application, meaning that we are actually using the mark in commerce. This second checkbox is saying that to our belief, there isn't any other party that has a right to use this mark before us. And then the third is that we understand that there's actual factual support for what we've stated in the application. So for example, we have this specimen here. This is a real legit specimen. And then the fourth checkbox is saying that we understand that we're subject to the penalty of perjury. So if we make false statements in this application, we could be subject to fine or imprisonment. Now, the signature here, you just have to put your name within slashes. So slash, first name, last name, and then closing slash. Remember, if you don't include the slashes on the front and the beginning, you'll actually get your app. When you click validate, it won't let you. It'll actually reject it. When you click date signed, it automatically populates today's date. It's a nice feature. And then again, you want to do last name, comma, first name, and then your middle initial. And then you're going to want to input your position. So in this case, I'm the owner. And then I put my phone number. Now, when I click validate, it's going to take me to the final page. Now, in this final page, I'll be able to review the application once more before I submit. So one thing I recommend doing is make sure you actually go through the application once. And if you'll notice, you want to make sure that the literal element of the mark is precise. You want to make sure that it's the actual mark that you're applying for. For example, if it's actually protecting innovator, not innovators with a plural, you can't fix that. Even if it's a really, really minor change, you're going to have to prepare a whole new application and resubmit. So just keep that in mind. It's really important that you get the mark correct. One thing about classes, I want to just remind you guys, each class is another filing fee. So if you have 2 classes, it would be $550. If you have 3 classes, it would be 3 times $275. So just keep that in mind. Each class is $275. Now, one thing I want to stress, remember that face masks are kind of interesting because there's also protective face masks and there's also medical face masks. So those would actually be under 2 separate classes, so they wouldn't be under clothing. So I'm assuming that in this case, face masks, because they're not really, they are protective, but they're not really protective in the understanding of protective gear. And so to me, they satisfy the clothing requirement. So they should be under class 25 as headgear. Now, when we click back, we're going to have the opportunity now of submitting. One thing though is you do want to double check the mark one more time. Here's that nice JPEG I was mentioning before. So this actually shows the mark as we're going to submit to the trademark office. So make sure this is correct. And this is a JPEG. You can actually download it if you like it. Now, if you click back and click on specimen, this is the very last bit. So this shows what was in the application before. So application looks good. One thing I do want to say, if there was any issue with the application, you can fix it really easily. Just click go back to modify, and it actually stores your session. So you can actually go back throughout the entire application. And when you go forward, it actually saves all your information so you don't lose anything. So really nice feature. So just keep in mind, you can get to the very end and say, hey, you know what? I actually want to make some changes. The other big thing that I will say that's pretty cool is that you can actually save this. If you go down to the bottom and click Save Form, it actually lets you download what's called a .obj file. That .obj file you can actually use in the future. So you can actually download it, not submit, and then tomorrow morning start the application process. And at the very, very beginning, it'll actually give you the option to upload the .obj file. Once you upload the .obj file, it'll restore your entire session, all the information that you submitted, so the specimen, the assigned filing basis, everything will be automatically uploaded. So it's a really, really nice feature. It lets you basically save your application and then come back to the same state that you were at the very end. So nice thing to keep in mind, like let's say you're not entirely sure that you want to submit today. Maybe you want to think about one thing, maybe you want to add some specimens, you can do it tomorrow. Just save the form and then it's like you were just where you were today. So it's a nice feature. Very last thing, this is just saying this checkbox, you have to check this checkbox before you can submit. This checkbox is just saying that there are no refunds. So once I click Pay Submit, that's it. Like I said before, if I wanted to somehow reword the mark, can't do that. Can't change the mark. You're gonna have to go through a whole nother filing fee. So just keep that in mind. So $275. If you for some reason misspelled the mark, you're gonna have to repay that $275, and you have no right to a refund. The other big thing that this is telling you is that there's no confidentiality. So this is going to be public record. As soon as I click Pay Submit, this application is going to be able to be viewed by anyone in the public. So just keep that in mind as well. Again, that's also why I mentioned before about the phone number. So I'm going to go ahead and click Pay Submit, and it's going to take me to a payment page. Okay. Now, once I get to the payment page, I can enter in my credit card or Visa, however I want to pay, and I'm almost done. Once I get to this page and enter my information and click Pay Submit, I'm going to be redirected to another page where I can download the application as filed. So it's called a filing receipt. So I click pay by credit card, for example, here. I can enter my credit card information here. But once I click Pay Submit, I'm going to get what's called a serial number. And that serial number is going to be tied to my application throughout the entire trademark process, and actually to my registered mark even after. So even after I have my registration certificate, I'll be able to look up my trademark based on its serial number. So just keep that in mind. Now, the serial number, it's also really handy because you can check the status of your application at any time throughout the examination process. So it's a good thing to keep handy.